Welcome, welcome. This is Kim Ades from Frame of Mind Coaching, and I am the host of Resilience Radio, where I interview guests who are professionals at crushing the tough stuff. Today, I have a very interesting guest. He lives near Ottawa, Canada, in Ontario, and I met him at a presentation that I did in the region, and he owns a company called Theia Partners. He is a very interesting person because he is in real estate, but not in the traditional sense. So I'm really excited to introduce him and have him explain to us exactly what he does and share with you his unique view of how to build communities. Rodney Wilts, are you with me?
I'm with you, Kim. Thanks for the intro. I should clarify. I'm a co-owner. My business partners, of course, are we all have an equal share, but I'm a co-owner of Theia Partners.
But just because you're a co-owner doesn't make you not an owner.
Oh, sure.
So
Sure. Just giving some love to my business partners there.
Okay. So what is Theia Partners? What do you do? We know when we think about real estate, we think about buying and selling homes. Sometimes we think about real estate like land development, that kind of thing. But you're taking this to a whole other level, and you think about this very differently than the average person. So share with us what you do and what your kind of perspective on all this is.
Sure. You know, for years, I would say I was a real estate developer, and I was at a conference with a good friend of mine who runs a marketing firm called Godspeed. They do amazing work. But anyway, my friend Thomas, who does own that company, he heard me say a few times that I'm a real estate developer, and he cornered me and he said, "You gotta stop saying that because everyone hates real estate developers. You're not a real estate developer. You're a values-based real estate optimizer." So I've stolen that
Hold
from
on,
Thomas.
say that again. Say that again.
a values-based real estate optimizer. So,
Okay,
that's the catchy moniker. But I guess what we are is we're a real estate development company with a twist. We are rooted in deep values. We care deeply about sustainability. And when we talk about sustainability, we really talk about sustainability broadly, which is about environmental sustainability, social sustainability. We're working on a project right now called ZB, which I think is really encapsulates the things that we care a lot about. It's a full community. It's about 4 million square feet right in the heart of the National Capital Region, right downtown. Former contaminated site. We're cleaning up that site, turning it into a sustainability showpiece with a renewable energy-based district energy system, a real focus on how do we build community and create spaces where people get a chance to get to know each other and bump into each other in the best possible way, including elements around kind of affordable housing. So how do we create the kind of community that's inclusive, has some of the most amazing luxury real estate that will be found in the entire region, but also real estate that's affordable and accessible. So that's the kind of work that we do. That's the kind of work that we love doing and are passionate about, is about sort of doing real estate development, but really coming from a well of deep values and trying to reflect those values in the projects that we do.
So I want to understand the concept of community. When you say we're building communities, sustainable communities in terms of environment, but I'm interested in the social aspect.
Yeah.
So, what do you think is currently missing from our communities now that prevent that social element? Like, as I look at the world, as I look at how we communicate on social media, yeah, there's a lot of communication on social media, but there's a lot of loneliness and there's a lot of isolation and there's a lot of distance. And so what is missing from our existing communities and how do you address that issue?
Wow, this is an amazing question. And I've given a lot of thought to this particular issue. You know, when we started doing the real estate development work, we thought so much about environmental sustainability, and we still think a lot about that, and we still put a focus on it. But then as the years started to roll on, we sort of realized, actually, you know what's 10 times harder is this idea of social sustainability, and how do you build communities, how do you encourage that kind of social interaction while still being respectful of people's privacy and all of those kinds of things. And in terms of the things that's missing, I think one of the challenges is oftentimes the way we design communities, the way we design buildings, is that people are in their car, they're listening to great podcasts, or they got the radio on, or what have you. They pull into their garage door closes. They either get in the elevator or they get into their house. They never see their neighbors, and then they hop on, what's called social media, but they're staring at the screen, and the end result is that kind of idea of social isolationism, loneliness, all of those kinds of things. I read an amazing book a few years ago called Happy City, and it really did a lot to kind of transform my thinking about how do we create communities that gently encourage this kind of social interaction. And the great Canadian planner, I think, with Jane Jacobs, I think she was American first, but she lived in Toronto. She had this idea of the serendipity of the sidewalk encounter, right? Where we create communities that are really, truly mixed use, that have fantastic public realm. And when you bump into somebody, you see them at the farmer's market, and then you see them at the yoga class, and then you run into them, at the dog park or what have you. Once you bump into them a few times, you start thinking, I know this person, even though you don't. You've just bumped into them a few times, and then conversations start, and that's how you kind of build community. On a building scale, we did a building a few years ago called the Eddy, which was a LEED Platinum building, and we had a bunch of sexy technology as it related to sustainability. But one of the things we did is we put a rooftop park on that building, and the rooftop park had a community garden and an alfresco dining area and barbecue and a fireplace. And it was a relatively small gesture, but it was the place where people bumped into each other, where they were planting their seedlings in the spring, they were harvesting their tomatoes in the summertime, they were eating outside, they were sitting around the fireplace in the fall. And the sense of community that builds just by providing that kind of amenity space is amazing. So that's the kind of thing we're always thinking about, is to sort of say, okay, great, how can we think about the amenity spaces, the public realm, the way the building operates, making the lobbies a little more generous and a little more pleasing, including elements of art that create a sense of place, all of those kinds of things to help create that idea of community.
So that's very interesting. So this whole concept of deliberately creating places where people can congregate, where they can bump into each other, where they can hang out, where they can go maybe for some personal time, some relaxing time, and find somebody else who's doing the same thing. So very interesting. I'm personally interested in that. My mom was in a nursing home, and it's a building, and it's supposed to be a place where people congregate and do all of that. And one of the most fascinating elements was that people congregated in, let's call it the lobby, the entrance.
Sure, right? Yeah.
It was beautiful, really kind of visually nice, but it's in Montreal where it's very, very cold. And when the doors opened, these senior citizens would freeze, right?
Yeah.
And so the structure of it was not conducive to actually sitting there. And so there's so many things to consider. But, was this really the best place for older people to meet? It was the only place. So they'd come bundled up in layers and layers of blankets so that they could be together.
Right.
But, it was less than ideal. So lots to think about there.
The interesting aspect is that shows that longing for social connection, though, right? That they were willing to expose themselves to Montreal's cold blasts and sit in the lobby just for that desire for social connection. Yes,
it's a huge, huge need. And I think that by and large, it's an underserved need. And it's underserved because it's not completely understood, and nobody raises their hand and says, I really need social connection, and here's what I want it to look like. Yeah. How long have you been running this company?
Well, Theia Partners, so myself and the two other partners who are active in Theia, we're all partners in a company called Windmill Developments, which we did for over a decade. And then Theia Partners is a relatively new entity that we've been running for a little bit over a year, that we spun out to focus on the ZB project and a couple of other kind of emerging projects that we have in the pipeline.
But how long have you been in real estate development?
Well, I've been involved in real estate since 2001. So
okay, quite a long time.
Starting to age me, though.
So looking back, what would you say was your greatest adversity in getting to this point?
My greatest adversity. There's a bit of a laundry list on that front, that's for sure. I would say, there's a couple things I would say. The one, I started my career as an environmental lawyer in Vancouver. So that's where I very first started my career. Knew very early on I wanted to be an entrepreneur. And I started Canada's first green building supply company. I knew nothing about buildings and I knew nothing about business. So how could I go wrong, Kim?
Right.
The classic entrepreneur story. And I started that business. That there was a big need, a big demand. We grew really rapidly, which was amazing. But there's no question that I was on a pretty steep learning curve. That was the MBA and fast forward with my meager capital at risk.
Right.
And so that I think that I certainly had some challenging times. I had a contractor that had $200,000 worth of bamboo flooring locked up in a parking garage while they got into a legal argument and told me I couldn't get my flooring and I wasn't going to get paid for it. And at that point in time, I was the sole owner of that enterprise and did not have particularly deep resources. And my wife was expecting our first child. All of those kinds of things. So those were some deep, dark days. There's no question. And I think unfortunately at that stage too, I didn't have the mentors around me or a great board of directors. And so I ended up selling that company, the Green Building Supply Company. But I learned a huge amount about resilience, about myself, about business through that process.
So I want to go back because you said I started a business without any business background. I had no real training or education in that field. I came out as a lawyer.
That's right, yeah.
So what made you think that was a good idea? And I'm not asking it in a facetious manner, although it may sound that way. I'm asking because a lot of people don't start businesses because they don't think they have the education, the background, the experience, etc. But some people do and say, you know what? I'll figure it out as I go. What was the thinking that said, you know what? I'm okay. I'm ready to jump into this.
Yeah, that's a great question. Part of it is the enthusiasm of youth, I think. So I think that was part of it. Part of it, when I said I had zero business experience, I had zero business experience of anything on that scale, but I really had been a lifelong entrepreneur. When I was 13 years old, I was running a lawn care business. I think when I was, 9 and 10 years old, I was trying to, extort my neighbors for money to come visit my bug zoo. I had a small little soap business to help put myself through law school. But these were tiny enterprises with no employees and no business plan and no accounting. They were little cash operations. But I had that deep itch that sort of I knew from an early age that I needed to be an entrepreneur. And so in terms of making that, and I think it was a combination. It was like, boy, I really desperately wanted to be an entrepreneur, but that was the pull part of the equation. But the push part of the equation is I went to law school. I dreamed of being an environmental lawyer. I was able to get a job at one of the best environmental law firms in the country called West Coast Environmental Law. It was like my dream job. And my goodness, I found it terribly boring. And when you're young and enthusiastic and full of energy, and you're sitting there looking at some kind of, terribly boring law textbook, and you've worked so hard for it, you sort of say, no, I have to do something different.
So let's talk about that, because I think it's very interesting. You had a degree in law, which is not easy to do, right? Like lots of years of study go into that. And you basically took a sharp right turn and said, this is not where I want to be. That must have been a difficult decision. Plus, you started a company, you grew it, and then you decided that you needed to sell it or shut it down or, again, depart it, right? Leave it behind.
Sure.
So you've made many decisions in your life, well, at least two significant decisions, where you've spent a lot of time, energy, money, focus, building something to then abandon it.
Sure. Yeah.
Now, I think those decisions are just as important as the decisions to start something.
Sure. And you know what? I mean, I had mentioned earlier that when I sold that business, I probably didn't have the degree of mentorship that I would have liked to have had around me. But when I was working at West Coast Environmental Law, and I will never forget this, and I pass on this little tidbit of advice to our younger employees. I interviewed a guy named Harold Kalki, and he was one of the pioneering, call them green developers. He had built David Suzuki Foundation's headquarters on 4th Ave in Vancouver. And I sat down with him, and boy, he spent the bulk of a day with me, which was so generous and amazing. Here I was, this, young kid who didn't know anything about development. And one of the things he had said to me that stuck with me was to sort of say, look, life is just a series of rooms. And you get into a room, and the only thing you know about that room is that there's two doors exiting, and the only door you can't choose is the door you just came in. But you're always going to have two different doors. So if you end up in a room and you don't like it, and it doesn't work out, and things aren't happening the way you like, jump into the next room. See what that thing's like. If you love it, stay there for a while. If you don't, there's two more doors. Choose a door, make a decision. And that was his kind of philosophy. And that's when I was, working as a lawyer in Vancouver, not loving it, and sort of saying, boy, wow, that's amazing. You can just, if you're not loving it, you can just leave the room, do something different. And there's going to be more options coming down the pipe.
So I really want to highlight that point, the idea that when we make a decision, it doesn't have to be a decision for life. We can depart from that decision. We can make a new decision. We can go on a different path. And this whole idea of I've made my bed, I have to lie in it, is a belief that many of us have that keep us stuck in a place of misery for a very, very long time. So I think that's a very important lesson. This whole idea of life is a bunch of rooms. If you don't like the room you're in, go to the next one. And if you don't like that one, there are many, many, many more rooms attached. So I really, really love that. Now, you are an award winner.
Yeah, well, I've picked up a few awards. Our ZB project has picked up a huge number of awards. It's been amazing. We won Best Master Plan in Ontario from the Ontario Professional Planning Institute. We won Best Master Plan in Canada from the Canadian Institute of Planners. The Best Master Plan, one of three sort of recognized as Best International Projects from the American Planning Association. Best Master Plan around the globe from the International Society of City and Regional Planners.
We're talking to a genius.
Well, if there was any genius, I did have the good fortune of leading that master plan exercise, but if there was any genius to it, it was assembling a really amazing world-class team, and consulting deeply. We've won awards for our community consultation, our community engagement. We talked to everybody, trying to get the intelligence of the Ottawa Riverkeeper, the Chamber of Commerce, the Downtown Business Association, the Ecology Ottawa, the local Algonquin groups.
Wow. So go back to the team factor, because I work with a lot of entrepreneurs, and I would say that they don't always surround themselves with the best team. How did you acquire your team?
Well, I think it really started with the one thing I think, again, that we did right just out of the gates was sort of saying, we want this thing to be world class. And I think that's a challenge that most people just don't start there. They don't start by saying, I want this to be world class. And so we went and toured. I went with my business partners, and we went and toured the best community developments around the globe. It was a tough gig, but went and hung out in Stockholm and Copenhagen and looked at communities in London and Freiburg and some communities down in the United States, and then looked at sort of saying, okay, who's been working on these projects, who is really world class. We brought a planning team from San Francisco that's been working on kind of world-class communities, landscape architect from Vancouver. We had energy experts from the UK, really, and that was the starting point to sort of say, no, this thing's got to be world-class. And from an overall basis, it's amazing because I don't think we paid that much more than we would have for, call it the usual cast of characters, but ended up with something that was pretty spectacular.
So you inspired them to get involved as well.
Yeah, I think that was an element too. I mean, certainly when we were engaging in that case, a pretty big collection of consultants, we were telling them to sort of say, look, we want this, we need this thing to be world class, and we need your A game. And that actually inspired people, to and gave people the ability to be a little more creative, because by its very nature, when you tell somebody, I want this to be world class, by definition, it can't be the status quo.
Right. So you set the standard very high.
Yeah.
Okay. So look at your life now. What is your current greatest challenge? It could be personal, professional. What are you contending with today?
Well, I think, and this is probably no surprise for you, Kim. I know you have a great deal of expertise on this front, but I think the biggest challenge I have is there's amazing opportunities out there, a growing business, but I also have two young kids, 13 and 11, presumably not a lot of years left at home. I have a wife who's an entrepreneur who has a rapidly growing business. And I think the biggest challenge I have right now is a very full life. I'm appreciative of having a very full life, but trying to strike that balance between being home for family dinners and making it to the kids' basketball games, but also taking advantage of the opportunities and helping the business grow. That's really, I think, the biggest challenge, the toughest nut.
So are you making those decisions with ease, or do you feel like a sense of struggle, maybe a little guilt? Like, how do you feel as you're making each decision about where you should be at what time?
Yeah, I would say, it's an ongoing struggle for sure. They're oftentimes not particularly easy decisions for sure. Yeah.
So I'm going to give you a piece of advice, if you don't mind. I have 5 kids, and it's so funny because last week's podcast, we touched a little bit on this subject about how do you balance things when you're an entrepreneur and you have children. And so the same question kind of comes up. And for me, I have 5 kids. I run a business. This was never a difficult decision. It was always really super clear for me, because just like life is like being in a series of rooms, and if you're not happy with one room, go to the next. I will tell you that there are a million opportunities, one after the other, just lining up for you, waiting for you to tap into and leverage. And so there is no shortage of opportunity. And we often feel like there's a limit, like there's a scarcity of opportunity. And that belief causes us to feel like, oh my God, if I don't take this opportunity, I'm going to be missing out. And what really happens is that now your values, and I love the word values, particularly for you because your business is so values based. Now your values are at odds with one another. So in your shoes, I would ask myself, like, what is my personal highest value? And if it's family, then there is no war, there is no debate, there is no moment where you feel like you're at odds with yourself. You always make that decision to lean towards the side of your family.
Right.
So this whole concept is, when you feel that struggle, it comes from a place of fear. Well, if I miss out, then I won't get this. Or if I'm not there, then the opportunity won't come to me again. Or if I'm not there instead of somebody else, like our best foot won't be placed forward, and on and on and on. So when you feel at odds, when you feel like those decisions are difficult, the question you need to ask yourself is, what is the belief I have around this particular opportunity that's making it difficult for me to make an easy decision? What are my beliefs? Do I believe that the only person who needs to be there is me? Do I believe that there won't be another opportunity like this again? Do I believe that I can't talk to this person in another setting that's more appropriate in terms of my own time frame? Like, what are my beliefs?
Right.
And when you start to push against those beliefs, you start to see, hey, I can be at home with my kids, and I can do what I want, and I can lead the life that I need to do and build a business on my terms.
Right.
So you do have a coach on the line. You do. Do you have a question for this particular coach?
Well, this is, I think there's in some regards a bit of a natural segue here, actually. We didn't plan this at all. So serendipity, we can say. But, I think one of the things that I'm giving a lot of thought to is as I round into the second half of my entrepreneurial journey, trying to strike that right balance between satisfying the entrepreneur's itch. And I think, one of the reasons I've had success is because I love growth. I love exploring new opportunities and have a general just impatience to make things happen. And that's part of the reason I, wasn't very good at sitting in a law office reading old legal textbooks, but trying to find now that balance towards being, pickier about opportunities or allowing things to kind of pass me by. It's that challenge between sort of striking that right balance between those. So it's not a particularly well crystallized question, but I wonder if you have thoughts on that front.
Well, I do have thoughts, and again, this comes from working with many entrepreneurs, but also from my own experience, and I'll share this with you. My goal was growth as a business owner, and so one of the ways we grow is when I am a guest on other people's podcasts. And so there was one year where I just went wild, and I was on approximately 200 something like that podcasts. And, anybody who asked me to be on a podcast, I'd be on that podcast because I was really, really determined to grow at a quick pace. And every time there was a podcast, basically people would then become aware of us and come to us and find out about us and request a complimentary coaching call. And that would lead us to some sales. Except that I started to realize that a lot of people that we were reaching were not our target market. We're not aligned with our mission. We're not aligned with the people we wanted to serve. And so for me, I literally did some podcasts on relationships. A very good friend of mine runs a podcast called Let the Love In Summit. And while I love the topic, it doesn't serve my particular market, which is high-end entrepreneurs and executives, right? It's not a match. And so one of the things that really helped me was to define my mission, to define my market, to define the kinds of projects that we would get involved with as a company and me personally. Here are the clients I coach. Here are the clients that I hand off to other coaches because it's not the best use of my time. And so once I kind of stepped away to really define the mission, the target, the scope of our work, what that did was it allowed me to easily eliminate everything else. Right? Because, great opportunity. But when I'm spending my time, my effort, my resources in the wrong place, one that's not aligned with our goals and our vision and our mission, I'm wasting time.
Sure.
And I'm not actually growing. And so for you, the real effort is to step back and say, what's our mission? And does this fit in the mission? If not, we pass it by. Right. I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. I think we need, we probably even need kind of further refinement on that front. And one of the things we're so passionate about our mission, which is about, improving sustainability broadly in the built environment. And as you mentioned earlier, there's just a world of opportunities. I do believe that. I believe in the growth mindset, and there's so much, and we believe in the mission, but then trying to also be even narrowing that down further to sort of say, okay, well, how do we be picky but still make really good forward progress.
Right. It's kind of like we can coach everyone in the world, but once we started to define exactly who we were targeting, a lot of our activities changed in terms of generating business and our content changed, everything changed.
Sure.
Right. So it allows you to be laser focused and really talk to the market you're trying to serve, and which eliminates a lot of wasted time.
Sure. Yeah, I get that. Yeah.
Amazing. Amazing. Rodney, thank you so much for spending time with us, for sharing your story. I love the analogy of life is a bunch of doors, and you just need to pick another one if you're not happy there. So thank you for sharing that with us. And how do people find you if they're interested in learning more about your projects?
Contact me via email, rodneyw@theiapartners.com. And Theia is THEIA. TheiaPartners.com. Yeah, great.
Amazing. Look them up, and specifically look up. I don't know if you've published anything about your ZB project, but that's interesting. I would encourage you to look that up.
Yeah, that's zb.ca, zibi.ca.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kim. It's been a pleasure.